The Adjudicator is a humongous lumbering behemoth and is also the boss of 4-1 Island's Edge. They were once a symbol of an ancient god worshipped by the Shadow Men, who were a tribe of barbarians, so to say. It was brought to life by the colourless fog and became an entity that judged the dead, punishing them for any sins that they had committed. For example, following in line with the battling essence of their culture, any acts of cowardice were seen as highly indictable. Another one, strangely enough, was the eating of birds. That action in particular was seen as heinous, even if it seems a bit odd, like why birds in particular? Well, that would be because the Adjudicator's true master was in fact a golden bird sitting atop its head. It's not a very challenging boss to fight, especially if you come equipped with a bow and snipe the bird from the top of the arena. The armor spider is a seemingly gigantic metallic spider that guards progression past 2-1. It can be a tricky boss for players coming across it, what with its highly resistant metallic body and its usage of strengthened variants of spells like Fireball and Ignite. An easy way to deal with it is by bringing a bow and sniping it from the beginning of the arena so you don't have to deal with its physical attacks. That may be a trend with the bosses in this game. Lore-wise, not much is known about the armor spider, but there's a couple of theories ranging from it being created by the fat ministers that you can find throughout the level, with correlations in spells that it uses, to it being created by the old monk as he was the one who in fact created the fat ministers, to it possibly even being created accidentally as a consequence of unnecessarily tampering with the crisp blade, which is a weapon that can be found nearby and was used during occult rituals. The Dirty Colossus is the boss at the end of the also infamous Swamp of Sorrows, aka 5-2. It's an extremely deformed creature that was birthed from the intensifying filth that continuously stockpiled in the Valley of Defilement. Its figure shows a monstrous machine-like entity that's covered in planks and all manner of garbage. It's also accompanied by a grotesque growth popping out from its left shoulder, as well as flies swarming around its head. In-game, it's not much of a challenge, being very manageable for the player with little quirks to disrupt the fight. The area beforehand proves to be about most of the challenge that the player will face with the Swamp of Sorrows as a whole. The Dragon God is the archdemon of Stonefang Tunnel, meaning it's that world's final boss. It's a towering 100-foot tall demon with an enormous arena-wide wingspan and piercing fists capable of devastating attacks. The boss fight that we play shies away from the usual assaults that our character can perform and leans more towards a stealth-like sequence where players have to carefully traverse the arena whilst keeping a close eye on the boss to ensure that they're not being seen as they make their way across. It can be brutal as one mistake can pretty much cost you the run, but as you progress you'll make your way to 2 ballistas one at a time that'll allow you to pin down the boss where you can slay the monster for the win. The Dragon God was born from the molten remains of ancient dragons deep within the Stonefang Tunnel. The ancient burrowers, worshippers of these dragons, built a temple to both honour and contain the Dragon God, but ultimately its resurrection was fueled by the deep fog as it managed to reach the bed of the world. Flamelurker is found at the end of the Tunnel City and is one of the game's toughest fights. It's a ferociously aggressive demon and can make quick work of you if taken lightly. It's also one of the few bosses in the game where there aren't any gimmicks in the fight for the player to pay attention to. It's just you versus the boss with no tricks up either sleeve. With the Flamelurker's powerful damage, high health pool and vicious speed, it can lead to a very stressful and demanding fight for many players to tackle. Once killed, you receive the Searing Demon's Soul, which when given to Blacksmith Ed at the start of 2-1 allows for advancements in weapon upgrades. His origins, like many others in the game, are pretty buried away and unclear, so it's hard to decipher, but his Archstone mentions a fire demon being seemingly sealed in an underground temple, which must definitely have some sort of connection to the Flamelurker himself. After completing the terrifying Prison of Hope, you're granted access to fight the Fool's Idol. The boss itself has a lot to unpack, starting with its moveset. Being a spellcaster, she has a variety of ways to interfere with the player's momentum, including being able to duplicate herself around the arena and also being able to debilitate players, whilst having the option to fire powerful spells at you whenever she pleases. All of this together in conjunction can create an incredibly chaotic experience, but with a little bit of patience and awareness, the Fool's Idol shouldn't be too much of a hurdle. Her appearance seems to be that of a doll, alive and human in size, whilst visibly being created as a replica of the deceased Queen of Latria. In reality, she's actually being controlled by the old monk, and the reason she's portraying the late queen is to trick the prisoners scattered across into believing that she's still alive, so that they'd be fueled with hope which would prevent them from any outbursts, but ultimately it would lead them to the church where they'd then be taken above by the gargoyles to be brutally experimented on by the old monk. Overall though, it's not a very tough fight, but can be an impossible one depending on whether or not players have already killed the prisoner that lies in the balcony of the church, as if left to its devices, it can endlessly revive the demon upon death. The boss of the Boletanian Palace, as well as the final boss of the game, King Allant, is one of the most memorable figures of Demon Souls. Formerly known as a once benevolent king, he was everything a ruler ought to be: kind, caring and vigilant in stopping the powers of evil. As he aged and aged, he looked endlessly for methods to inflate his might. This eventually led him to the Nexus, where he learned soul arts, which he took back to his kingdom to further bolster its prosperity, but that just wasn't enough for Allant. He'd end up returning to the Nexus to awaken the Old One from its eternal slumber, to grant him the power that he lusted for. The boss you find at the end of 1-4, the King's Tower, isn't the real Allant but a demonic reflection known as the False King, or the Old King, whilst his true form lies beneath the Nexus itself. That doesn't mean it's any pushover. The False King is for many Demon Souls' true test of ability. He has a myriad of attacks in his moveset, from your regular slashes and swings to arena-wide AoEs, and even an ability to drain your character's level upon connection, making him an incredibly menacing foe. Once you do beat the False King, you are able to travel down below the Nexus to find Allant's true form, which has been seriously deformed into an almost slug-like creature. To further emphasize the tragic tale, this fight is exceedingly easy compared to the aforementioned False King, and makes for an interesting thematic conclusion to the game. Leechmonger is the first of the 3 bosses that appear in the Valley of Defilement. Its introductory cutscene showcases it as a mass compilation of leeches bubbling out from beneath a nasty pool of filth to finally form a powerful demon that's ready to attack the player. Gameplay wise, the arena that the boss is situated in is large in height, but the Leechmonger will stick to its natural swamp of muck, whilst it attacks by extending its arm-like appendages made of leeches to fling clusters of parasites at the player. The creature also regenerates health by absorbing leeches from its surroundings, prolonging fights and adding a bit of challenge if players don't stay on the offensive. That can be annoying for sure, but on the flip side, it's very vulnerable to ranged attacks like spells or even a bow, which makes it another one of the simpler encounters in the game. Maiden Astrea is a really interesting and unique fight, even for Demon Souls' standards. She was brought up as a follower of God and was pure of heart, showcased especially when she travelled to the Valley of Defilement, only to be plagued with pity when faced with the situation that the world had been in. This in turn gave her the conviction to aid the alien citizens there for many years, which eventually also caused her to lose faith in God, who in her mind allowed their suffering to continue. This realization led her to demonhood as a means to rule over the land, amassing a large cult following that worshipped her for salvation. Though her intentions were from a place of good, ultimately this would change the Valley of Defilement forever. She would take the souls from her followers, limiting their ability to think and feel harm, and her followers would also kill those who didn't believe in her vision. Even knights would fall at her hand, with the help of her bodyguard, Garl Vinland, who served as her eternal protector. It's evident when the player enters her arena that the maiden isn't looking to fight, but to keep us from causing carnage. But we have to battle against Garl Vinland, who effectively serves as the true boss, and can be a tough one at that if the player rushes in with no strategy. Ultimately, when killed however, the maiden commits suicide, which ends her reign and concludes an incredibly thought-provoking character. The boss atop 3-2 Upper Latria, the Maneaters, are another one of the game's toughest encounters. They're a pair of malformed creatures who have erratic attack patterns, which set highly turbulent standards for how players will have to tackle them. Yes, I did mention a pair of creatures, as this boss battle paves the way for one of From Software's longest standing traditions in the Souls series, the trend of having a second enemy join the battle when the first reaches half health. The second Maneater will make the fight even more chaotic and will place more importance on positioning as the tight and narrow nature of the arena becomes more apparent. They were assigned to guard the final corridor leading to the throne room in the Old Monk's tower. The Maneaters are twisted monstrosities created through the experiments of the Old Monk by combining distinct features of many different creatures: the face of a man, wings from creatures capable of flight, and the tail of a serpent. They have a great design and are a tricky fight, especially when their AI will randomly bug out, causing an already unpredictable fight to become even more hectic. The old hero is the boss that waits behind the fog door of 4-2, the Ritual Path. He's a blind swordsman who relies heavily on his hearing to aid him in battle, which makes our bout with him tense, similar to a game of cat and mouse, as he is deadly if any of those attacks connect from that giant curved sword. It can be an intimidating fight on first glance, but can be trivialized with the use of the Thief's Ring. The old hero himself is a legend amongst the Shadow Men and their beliefs. He was a hero in their culture and was put to rest in a place just before their shrine to the Storm King. The Shadow Men honoured their dead through detailed rituals, beginning with the judgment by their god, the Adjudicator. If deemed a true hero, the deceased were purified by the light water from their caves before being laid to rest. The Shadow Men culture wanted great heroes to be accepted by the Storm King in death, which is another reason why we find the old hero so far under right before the Storm King itself. The old monk is the archdemon of Latria and is a husk of his former self, a phantom controlled by the golden robes that he's dressed in. He was originally a powerful figure in Latria, but was banished from said place for reasons that we aren't aware of. Now he's nothing but a vessel for insanity, in control of various torturous experiments, many of which can be found in the prior level roaming about. The golden robes are the true terror, as it can summon aid to help it out, which is showcased when we, the player, enter the arena. The fight changes depending on whether you, yes you, are playing online or offline. If online, another player will be summoned, turning the boss into a PvP duel, so the challenge can vary significantly depending on the player's skill. If offline, then a regular NPC will be summoned, which is an absolute pushover and can be handled with extreme ease. You can also offer yourself to be in place of the boss for other players to fight you, a good way to partake in PvP and an easy way to obtain the unwelcome guest trophy. The Penetrator is the boss that fights you upon completion of 1-3, the Inner Ward. From his introductory cutscene, you can gather a lot about him. He's a badass knight who bears resentment to the fat ministers as he brutally pierces one in epic fashion. He's actually the corrupted form of Metis, a knight of the Round Table, who was known for wielding an abnormally long sword that could kill men with absolute ease. Interestingly enough, if you bring Bjor of the Twin Fangs, another knight from the Round Table that didn't succumb to demonhood, into the boss fight, then the Penetrator's aggro will remain mostly on him. Gameplay wise, the fight can be an early glimpse into many of the knight type boss battles that we have today. It's an excellent duel that isn't too easy, yet can engage players into a fun and thrilling fight. The first boss battle that most players will end up defeating will be the Phalanx, who appears in 1-1, the Gates of Boletaria. The Phalanx is a large amorphous mass of writhing hoplites, which are smaller, shielded blob-like creatures. These hoplites are bound together, forming a protective barrier around the core of the Phalanx. Each of them wield a spear and a large shield, making direct attacks against the core difficult. The battle itself revolves around dismantling its defences by eliminating the surrounding hoplites. Once they're clear, its vulnerable core can be easily attacked for the win. The Phalanx, much like the Penetrator, is the corrupted form of another knight of the Round Table, this time being Longbow Ulan, an archer who would snipe enemies from afar, guaranteeing that she'd never have to face the ferocity of close quarter combat. The Storm King is the final boss of the Shrine of Storms and makes for one of the game's more cinematic encounters. It's a massive manta ray-like demon that soars through stormy skies above the battlefield. During the boss fight, it's accompanied by a lot of smaller similar creatures called Storm Beasts who rain down deadly projectiles at the player. To effectively combat this encounter, the player must locate the Storm Ruler in the battlefield. This weapon has a unique ability to summon powerful gusts of wind, allowing the player to strike at the Storm King and the Storm Beast from afar. It's a gimmick that would return in the future with similar takes on it like Yhorm from Dark Souls 3 or Rykard from Elden Ring. The Storm King itself was worshipped by the Shadow Men, who revered it as a god of storms and the skies. They believed that the Storm Beasts would bring forth all the rain that their land would be occupied with. It's a majestic fight, no doubt, one of the most awe-inspiring in the series. The Tower Knight is the boss that you fight after traversing through 1-2, the Law's Path. He's an enormous humanoid clad in thick steel armour, wielding a colossal lance and the iconic tower shield. He's joined by a platoon of archers ready to snipe players down as they enter the arena. The key to defeating him lies in targeting his ankles, which are his weak points. Striking these areas repeatedly will stagger him, causing him to collapse, exposing his head for juicy damage. Much like the Penetrator and the Phalanx who we spoke about prior, the Tower Knight is also the corrupted form of another knight of the Round Table, Alfred, the Knight of the Tower who wielded the biggest shield that Boletaria had to offer. His heavy defense combined with his mighty lance were a force to be reckoned with, which is made clear during this iconic boss encounter. The Vanguard Demon appears right at the beginning of the game, in an encounter that players only get one shot at. It has a hulking, monstrous figure with grey spiked flesh and a massive imposing physique. Its body is covered in sharp protrusions and it wields a giant stone axe capable of dealing devastating damage. Despite its size, the Vanguard is surprisingly agile, using swift sweeping attacks to punish players who stay too close. The fact that you only have one attempt at victory puts massive stakes on this fight, as many are bound to fail unless players are coming into the game with some From Software experience. The Vanguard Demon itself is a manifestation of the Old One's corruption, a minor demon created to act as a foot soldier for the demon army. Though not as powerful or significant as the major demons, it represents the Old One's capacity to turn humans into monstrous beings. If you do fall at his hands in the tutorial, you do get a chance to face him as an encounter at the beginning of 4-1, albeit a more annoying encounter, needing to clear out the skeletons beforehand and having to deal with the Storm Beasts at the same time. Thanks for watching this video everybody, be sure to drop a like and subscribe for more Souls content. Peace!